Thank you very much, Ulrike, and thank you to everybody at the Deutsche Frauenrat for inviting us here to Berlin today. I have so much enjoyed all the previous interventions, and I have learned a great deal about the heroes of the German feminist movement as well. These stories which we don't hear enough about, I think. So thank you so much for that and for that opportunity. The European Women's Lobby is the largest umbrella of women's organizations in Europe. We have organizations in 31 European countries, bringing together more than 2,000 grassroots women's organizations. And the Deutsche Frauenrat is our member here in Germany. We bring together the women's movement to campaign together with a stronger voice for our vision of a feminist Europe. Sadly, we are very far from having achieved that vision. But we have been working together for nearly 30 years now to advance women's rights and gender equality across the continent. And we are also holding our governments and institutions accountable for the commitments that they've already made in the Beijing Platform for Action, in CEDAW, and also in the treaties of the European Union. As we celebrate 100 years of the right to vote for some women in Germany, we are also celebrating across many countries in Europe. In the United Kingdom, where I'm originally from, in Poland, in Austria, in Latvia, Estonia, and also in Ireland. There are celebrations this year for the centenary of some women's rights to vote. And I wonder what these pioneers that we've been hearing about would think if they could see us now. What would they think about what was happening today in Europe? What would they think about the state of women's rights 100 years into the future? I think there would be some things they would be extremely excited about. I think they would be excited about the way in which women have seized their opportunities for education. Now graduates from universities across Europe are majority women. I think they would love to see women in all careers, in all businesses, in all public spaces. They would love to see that we have independent legal identity, although I understand there's still some work to do in Germany on your tax laws there. That we have increasingly legal rights and social rights to control our own bodies, to defend ourselves against violence against women, to access birth control, sexual reproductive health and rights, to control our own money, and to access power. I think they would be excited by that, but they would probably be puzzled about why we haven't achieved more and how we ended up getting stuck. So there's been a huge transformation, you could say a revolution in women's place in society in 100 years. And yet what we see from the statistics today is that we have stopped progressing in Europe for the last decade. For the last decade, we have seen progress at a snail's pace and in tiny pockets in different places. That would be another conference to explain why I think that is. But we know when it comes to pay, pensions, violence, access to power, we know that we are not doing well enough, and women are still treated as second-class citizens today in Europe. And we know it's even worse when it comes to women who are minorities, or are migrants or have disabilities, for younger women, and it's not good enough, and we need to do more. And I really want to say that the gains that we have made have been very unequally distributed, geographically, but also from the context of class, race, migration status, ability, geography. And so we have to be really careful about making sure that the next revolution in progress for women affects all women equally. Apparently I have to wrap up a bit faster. I wanted to particularly invite you today to participate in our campaign for the European elections taking place in 2019 across a few days towards the end of May next year. It's the 23rd to the 25th of May. Today, we have 200 more men in the European Parliament than women. In the last election, 37% of members of parliament elected were women. There's actually less now, because men have replaced some women who have left. 2/3 of the European commissioners are men, despite the commitment from President Juncker to change that. And this is in spite of the fact that the European Union's treaties are a legal commitment to equality between women and men, and that actually goes back to the very first treaties. The Treaty of Rome had a commitment to equal pay for work of equal value 60 years ago. So this is why we think that it's particularly important to have more women represented in decision-making at all levels. We've heard here stories of municipal levels, of regional levels, and also of national level parliaments. But we think that we need to have quotas. I wanted to make that really clear, that that's the only way that you can really make the radical shift in culture that's needed to have 50% women at all levels of decision-making. And that means in economics, it means in business, it means in parliaments, it means also in civil society and trade unions, it means across the spectrum. And quotas are not the goal. Quotas are a tool and a means to shift the balance, and we need to address all the other things that have been mentioned about the barriers to women's participation, the violence, the discrimination, and the political will as well. So I want to invite you at this time to learn a bit more about our campaign for a 50-50 European Parliament next year. It's a critical time in Europe's history. It's almost a cliche to say that. I can 5 minutes, okay. So I can talk about populism. I can talk about populism for a bit, perhaps, because we've seen a rise in populism across Europe, and make no mistake, all of that populism comes with an anti-women and an anti-feminist agenda. It comes with an anti-migrant agenda, it comes with an anti-LGBT agenda, but the first point of attack is women's rights. It's women's bodies, it's women's rights, it's women's active participation in society. And we, as women across Europe, need to hold hands with our allies and make sure that those populists are pushed back from where they seem to be thriving. We know that women's rights and advancing on gender equality is the best way to achieve happier, healthier, and even more sustainable societies for everybody in the society. And for too long, women's voices have not been at the heart or adequately powerful in the decisions about the European Union at all levels of politics. And when people ask me, why does it matter to have women in parliaments, in boardrooms, and you see that picture of the Ministry of Interior, and you think, who in that group of people who is making critical decisions about civil liberties and human rights and justice in Germany has experienced rape, has experienced sexual harassment, has experienced childbirth, all these things that we need to have people who've had those experiences, I think, today. We at the European Women's Lobby are not feeling downhearted by all the challenges ahead. Actually, we're feeling quite hopeful, because what we're also seeing is something unprecedented in women's response and rising up to face the challenges ahead. We have never seen the numbers of women campaigning online and on the streets, from the Million Women March in Spain to the impact of Me Too, changing the conversation about the way in which men and women interact in public spaces and in the workplace. We are really uplifted, and what we need to do through our campaign next year is ensure that that is translated into women actively participating in the elections, actively participating as candidates, actively participating as voters, actively participating as campaigners. And we need to do that across Europe. So as a pan-European organisation, I'm going to just tell you a little bit what we have planned and to invite you to participate in that, if I may. So here's a point of action for you. Our campaign for the European elections, we launched it in June. It's called Women for Europe, and Europe for Women, we hope as well. We aim really to have 50% of women in the European Parliament, and ultimately also 50% of women European commissioners. And how do we do that? That requires a coordinated approach across Europe, because the European elections are national elections, nationally organised elections for a European Parliament. So we have a working group called our Women in Politics Working Group, and the representative of the Deutsche Frauenrat is our very own Ulrike, who represents the voice of the Deutsche Frauenrat alongside all of our other members, where we're exchanging information, campaign tactics, developing tools and messages together so that we can have a much stronger voice at the national level with the parties, in the elections, amongst women themselves, and also at European level. So our campaign has 4 main elements. I'm the kind of woman who can't multitask. No? So we have 4 parts to our campaign. We have, the first thing is a pledge. And that was what was going to be on the screen. I've also tweeted all of this information. If you're following on Twitter, the Parität, I hope I didn't destroy the... this is a pledge for politicians and candidates, political parties and citizens to pledge to having an equal representation of women and men in the European Parliament and across the institutions. We also have a petition on wemove.eu, where you can sign in support of that and distribute that further. But this is a pledge. We're getting politicians to sign it physically. We're also driving it out through the political parties during the course of the next few months. The second part of our campaign is a manifesto. So this is a set of demands from the women's movement in Europe about how we think the next European Parliament and European Commission should act to advance women's rights in Europe so that everybody, all women and all men, can enjoy their rights fully and equally. And that manifesto can be used at national level, at European level, be translated and distributed in different ways. And that will be finalised the end of this month. The third part, Gwendolyn spoke a little bit about it earlier, is a very practical tool we're offering to political parties and candidates, a training for women candidates and groups in parties to combat online violence against women. It's become one of the major barriers to women's participation in elections. Women even do not want to stand for election anymore, such is the fear that they have of the online violence and abuse that they will experience. So we have a tool, a training tool that we offer to parties and candidates about what can be done to combat that. Not just self-defense, but structural measures that parties can address to protect the women candidates. And then finally, we are going to have the last 100 days. So the elections are taking place 23rd to 25th of May 2019. And from late February, we will have an intense push towards getting women out to vote, getting women to vote for women, getting everybody to vote for feminist candidates, and getting pressure on all people participating that we demand women's rights in the next period of the European Parliament. So final 30 seconds, can I? So I just want to say we owe it to all the women who came before us and the women who thought about something that had never been achieved to not just settle for what we have. We owe it to them not even to settle to defend the gains we've already made. Right now, what's needed is not to retreat, but actually to advance. And we learn anything from them is to be bold, is to be loud, is to be united in demanding not just more action, but more radical action to achieve gender equality and women's rights in Europe. So I invite you all to join us at the European Women's Lobby in our campaign to fight for that in the next European elections. Thank you.